TJ. My place in this world. Interesting question for all of us, isn't it? Finding our way and finding our place. St. Francis of Assisi, he started the Franciscan, what you would know today as the Franciscan order. And he was always concerned about his place in the world because he had such an outstanding reputation as a devout and holy and wise man that sometimes it got to him to the point where he started actually believing all the good stuff that people said about him. And every time that happened, every few years, he decided he needed to do something. So on one occasion, his compatriot was Brother Juniper. And Brother Juniper was known as a simpleton. Now understand, if you call somebody a simpleton today, you're insulting them and saying you're really dumb. Or you do dumb stuff. In the Middle Ages, with Brother Francis of Assisi, to be a simpleton was to be a comic, somebody who saw humor in life, where others might not see it. So that is why Brother Juniper was a good one for St. Francis to go with whenever St. Francis was starting to get full of himself. So one day that happened to St. Francis, and he said, Brother Juniper, it's time. I'm starting to feel filled with myself. I'm starting to believe what all the good stuff people are saying about me. So we're going to go out and we're going to walk through the town of Assisi in our underwear. And that's what they did. They spent the day in Assisi walking around in their underwear. And people just stared at them and looked at them and then tried not to look at them. But St. Francis, at the end of the day, got back to the monastery where he was living and felt much better about himself because he realized that he had punctured all of the pretenses that people had about him. And it also, well, frankly, humiliated himself is what he did. But it brought him back to earth so that he realized that he wasn't better than everybody, but that he was actually part of the community and maybe even, who knows, not as good as some other people. There was another time that same thing started to happen a few years down the road. So he went to Brother Juniper and said, Brother Juniper, grab this end of the board. We're going for a walk. So they walked into the town of Assisi with a board, a long one, and they put it on top of a rock that just happened to work out right in City Square, and they made a seesaw. And they spent the entire day seesawing. And people came by and looked and stared at them, and then finally they came over and started chit-chatting with them. And again, that was one of Francis's way of becoming part of the community, rather than letting the community lift him up onto a pedestal. And of course, you know what happens whenever you've been lifted up on a pedestal. What happens to all of our politicians that get lifted up on a pedestal? Huh? People start chipping away at it and start knocking you down. Francis was aware of that and recognized the nature of sin to build people up in order to knock them down. So that was a couple of the ways that Francis handled those things. I wouldn't recommend those all the time for you, but there are ways that you can handle your life so that you don't ever feel as if you are outside of the human family. However, that is precisely the topic that Jesus has today in the gospel reading. How do you continue to participate in the human family even when you're holding your nose most of the time? And some of the stuff that goes on, things that irritate you when you get into the political or the religious or the economic, where you just don't feel like you really belong and you wonder how all the injustices and crazinesses of life can occur. And so Jesus talks to that with the people in Nazareth, because of course, as you heard when I read that, even his own family thought that he was off. That he was having some mental issues, some emotional problems and things like that. And they tried to call him into the house so that the rest of the town and the village wouldn't think that he was a crazy guy. But he wasn't being crazy at all, because what he was doing, he was talking about anthropology. You know, anthropology is the study of people and of cultures and how groups of people function in a group, and the kinds of rules and regulations the kinds of behaviors that any given culture has, which make it coherent and workable. We live in a culture, and we have our rules and our laws that make it somehow coherent. And if we run into an injustice, or somebody challenges one of the rules and regulations or laws of our culture, we have ways of working with that and making our adjustments as we need to do that. So Jesus, of course, was doing the same thing. He was trying to describe a new humanity, a new way of being a human that had been lost from the time of the Garden of Eden. This is the first time he uses the word parable, by the way. And it's really not a parable, the story of Satan, but it is more of a riddle that you have to unpack, and it transcends some common logic and reasoning when he's talking about Satan destroying Satan and plundering his own house and things like that. He says at one point, if a kingdom or house is divided against itself, that kingdom or house cannot stand. And that's very true. You can see that in your own household. I was talking to a family who happened to call because they had one member of their family likes to take all the change that's sitting in whatever, they put it in a can or a jar or something like that. And she's done that for her whole life, and they've just gone with it. But then another one of the siblings was having to do some sitting for some dogs of a neighbor, and the key was missing. Guess who they blamed? They blamed the daughter who was always taking the change and not reporting that she was taking all the change. Because in the family system, she was not precisely a thief, but sort of a stealer, and wasn't part of the family entirely, but was sort of straddling the fence a little bit. A house divided against itself, Satan against Satan, that kind of thing. And so, of course, they got into a humongous family tiff over her stealing that key. And guess what? She did not steal the key. Yes. The other daughter had put it down so that another daughter took the key so that she could go sit for the dogs while this other daughter was working. But anyhow, it just exposed some of the weaknesses in the family system. And they got into a huge battle. And that's why I got phoned home. And I asked if I could tell this story without naming names or giving away any information, or anybody would guess who it was. So, anyhow, what that exposed was what Jesus was talking about. How, as a human being, do you define yourself? Most of the time, we define ourselves because of sin, Satan, death, and the devil. We define ourselves over against other people. It is very easy to say, I am not like that. I am like this. I would never do that. I am like this. You see what I'm getting at? You define yourself based on other people's behaviors and language and things like that. And that is precisely what Jesus is confronting in the gospel reading today, saying that an unhealthy sense of humanity, an unhealthy human being is somebody who can only define himself or herself based on accusations against others. You got that? He says that originated with Adam and Eve in the garden. You'll notice what happened there. I thought that was pretty nifty, right? It was very cool. Eve takes the apple, gives it to Adam. God comes along, and you have all of a sudden the perfect unhealthy triangle. Adam says, she made me do it. She says, the snake made me do it. And the snake is there. I didn't do anything. It's perfect triangulation of the most unhealthy kind, because it's based all on accusation and making yourself feel good and better about yourself at other people's expense. And Jesus is saying, no, God did not create us with that kind of humanity in mind. He, in fact, created us to be a different kind of human being, the kind in which we stand on our own 2 feet with the resources of our full humanity as a resource and available to us. And instead of doing a satanic kind of work, you'll always know Satan is present, by the way, and evil whenever there is a division, wherever there's an accusation. Because that which is beautiful, that which is pleasing, that which is good, will always get plundered. Always. And so you'll know that you're in a bad way, in a bad place, in an unhealthy circumstance, whenever the accusations start to flow. Now, what Jesus, on the other hand, was beginning to say about Satan casting out Satan was to talk more about what it means to be a follower of his in the process of beginning to think through what your humanity is in a different way. He talks about the humanity of people, the anthropology of the new creation, by using a very simple test case. And it's not even a test case, it's just a very simple discussion about the nature of forgiveness. And says that in order to be a fully functioning human being, you are going to be a person who practices the art and craft. You'll notice I say art and craft because it's not native to us. It is a craft and an art that needs regularly to be worked on. So that forgiveness, the pieces of them are very simple. One is recognition. If you're ever in a situation of division or accusation or close to that kind of circumstance, you always want to have a sense of reality, a recognition of what's going on in the circumstance. You've got a break. You evaluate what the break is in a logical, systematic fashion. You then have some remorse, and in the Bible, remorse is not just sadness or a lamentation against things. It also is simply a recognition that you participated in it somehow, and yet you have to sort of figure out how it is that you participated in the break, in whatever other way you've done that. And then you begin the healing process, which means you have to get inside the other person's head and in their skin a little bit in order to understand where they're coming from and what their hurt is based on. Sometimes the hurts which people have and you don't reveal. I mean, how many times have all of us been wounded emotionally by something in our lifetime? And we have never revealed what it is. We've just sort of blew it off and let it go, but it has affected and impacted our relationships over a period of months and years. In other words, you end up living a lie because you have to cover up the reasoning, and that takes time and energy, and where you have one little lie, you end up with a bunch more. You know, it takes so much time and energy, it's just outrageous, as you well know. I had a conversation with a 20-something who shall be unnamed earlier this week. Just happened to run into her out on the street downtown, and she said, he just came right up and said, "What do you do when you know everything?" Well, I thought that was a pretty good question. I said, Well, you don't know everything because you're young, and you don't know everything. You have a lot more learning to do. And then she said to me, I've never had this said to me before, "You're lowering my IQ." And you know what? I couldn't disagree. I was lowering her IQ because I wasn't treating her as a fully functioning human being who had brains. I was sort of talking down. And so I was lowering her IQ and my own at the same time. So then I said, okay, let's up your IQ. Hey, even if you do know everything, and you're old enough to have had enough experience to know people who play you, who will insult you, who will be your friend and then screw you, and talk about you behind your back. You know what it means to have triangles and be part of triangles where you're either the accuser or the blamer or the victim. That's the classic triangle, by the way, right? Blame, accuse, victim. So let's just say that you do know everything. Now the question becomes, and what Jesus posed in the gospel readings and in his life was very simple. Now that you know what you know, what are you going to do? And there's a guy by the name of Rich Rodriguez who is has just written, and I was just reading it, a spiritual autobiography called Darling, a Spiritual Autobiography. That's pretty simple. He wrote this in one sentence in his autobiography as a prayer. Bless me, Father. I have lived my life in lowercase letters. In writing his autobiography, he recognized that he had diminished his life to the point where it was insignificant. And his life didn't matter to anybody because he hadn't put himself out there. So I said that to her, and then I said, now that is your question, is it not? Knowing what you know, what shall you do? You know that people plunder each other. We screw up and break up relationships. We're killing off the earth slowly but steadily and don't want to admit it because it's going to be expensive and it's going to take money out of our wallet. God bless us all. Poor things, us. The question is, are you going to live your life with lowercase letters? Or are you going to write your life with uppercase letters? In other words, are you going to live a life which is significant and important? Or are you going to live a life in which you just sort of disappear into the woodwork and complain and moan and get your meaning by pointing out the faults of everybody else, and you sit back and take pleasure in knowing yourself without really knowing yourself at all, but only knowing the faults of others? Jesus said that is how Satan is killing Satan off, because he plunders and destroys and hurts. And the new humanity into which you and I have been baptized, as St. Paul aptly points out, is we are people who live lives of uppercase letters. We write our lives larger. And in order to write your life larger, you have to put yourself out there, do you not? You have to go public with your faith. You have to go public with your generosity. You have to go public with your kindness. You will be noticeable. And that is why when you start to feel uppity, like I do sometimes, as you so kindly point out to me on occasion, Jeanette, I will start walking around in my underpants down in Stroudsburg. That will keep me humble and also in jail, I might add. But you get the idea of why St. Francis did what he did. Because he was writing his life with large letters. Look what happened to Jesus. He did not write in lowercase. He wrote in uppercase, taking care of people on the margins of life who were just marginally existing and getting by. Look what happened to him. He gets hung up on a cross. But you see, the beauty for the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the other religious authorities and the government was that they were able to define themselves by saying, this guy's a nut job, and he's breaking the law, and they were able to define themselves by not doing one decent thing for another human being. It was all lowercase. So, as Jesus is talking to you and to me on this day, he's offering us a new way to be a new human being. And that's one who writes his and her life larger. And the way in which you enlarge your life is simply by enlarging your relationships, by enlarging the places you go, by enlarging your interests and the things that you do, by taking maybe some chances that you normally wouldn't do. There was a couple of weeks ago, I don't know if you saw, did you see the Tom Brokaw article in Parade magazine? It was in the Sunday paper. And you don't get the Sunday paper, right? Okay. Then go online to parade.com and look the darn thing up, okay? Here's the one thing that I also said to the young lady. If you don't read, you will stay stupid. Because reading expands your horizons no matter what you're reading. Because you're getting in a relationship and a conversation about whatever it is you're reading about, getting some ideas, getting some thoughts, even if it's a thought about going on a vacation somewhere that you otherwise would not have had by not reading. But Tom Brokaw in Parade magazine talked about, you know, he's older now. He has just survived a bout of cancer, right? He was on TV, a commentator for many, many years. Said this: you can wield a powerful influence in life, even in the midst of loss. And in his case, his loss was a body part and also a little bit of mobility. He said this: pay attention to what's going on around you. Be alert. Be flexible. Be an observer of life. So you gather ideas. He says further, open your calendar up. Take some time to do some things that you normally would not do. Now, I was talking to one young man earlier this week who only looks at a book when he has a class. And I said, you know what? Go in and get some magazines, go to the library, look at some mags, doesn't matter what kind, just look through them. Just look through them. Open your calendar up and buy yourself a little bit of time so that you also have time to cultivate your friendships and your relationships. Brokaw then went on to suggest increase your odds for joy and renewal. Try to do more things. Do some new stuff that you haven't done before. And try to make sure that you're successful at doing it. Who knows what that might be? And I was talking to somebody a couple weeks ago and said, you know, we've lived in the Poconos for about 40 years and we never went to any of the waterfalls. There had been an article in the Sunday paper, which you don't get, about all the waterfalls in the Poconos. We lived here 40 years and we never went to any of them. So we're going this summer to at least one waterfall. I said, good, good. Make sure you figure out how far of a distance it is so that you can actually make it there and back without calling an ambulance. Well, in this case, yes. He also suggested to take some chances. By that he meant going outside of your comfort zone with your life. Meet some new people, go to some new places, do some new things, do something more creative. I was talking to a guy a couple of months ago, as we were just entering spring. You know, Shawnee Playhouse has a bunch of plays and stuff and musicals and all that they do all summer long. And he's never done any of that stuff. He wants no parts of it. Guess what? His wife got tickets. And yes, he's going. I forget what they're seeing. Nonsense? Is that coming up? Nonsense. Or something like that? They were talking about, yeah. He's never done anything like that. It's outside of his comfort zone. But it'll introduce him to the theater and to some new ideas and things like that. And the final thing he says is, let it go. Let it go. That's what I said to that family with the key incident. Sometimes you gotta let it go. You gotta say, we screwed up. We were wrong. We're sorry. No, we don't trust you 100%. That's why we accused you. But we're letting it go. You see how Jesus is talking about when he talks about blaspheming the Holy Spirit? The only thing you can blaspheme is not doing the art and craft of forgiving and being forgiven. See how critical that is? I mean, there's not a day goes by in any of our houses that one of us doesn't do something where we need to be forgiven. It's just the nature of sin. We're screw-ups. We do stuff. And that's why it's so important and why Jesus talked about himself coming into Satan's house and plundering it. And the way he went about plundering it was to try to create a new sense and a new vision of what it means to be a fully functioning human being. And that means simply using all of the resources that God gave you as part of his image. The big one being the gift of forgiveness, which is an art and a craft. It just doesn't come like that. You got to work at it. And that means you work at the relationships with it. And whenever you get into a situation of accusing, blaming, or being victimized, first place you want to be is looking at the cross. That'll give you the idea of what's really going on. And from there you can begin to apply that to the circumstances that you're in. And then take the steps of reconciliation, forgiveness, empathy, recognition of what's really going on. You know, the gifts are present with you and within you all the time, in every time, in every place. And the call of Jesus to you and I as disciples of his is to practice them. And to practice them for the sake of the world. So that we actually are able to create in the kingdom of God better human beings. And in the creating of better human beings, we create better